On World News tonight, a huge explosion in Tel Aviv while the Israeli Prime Minister is in the Oval Office. Many people have been killed and injured. The FBI identifies a suspect in the mailbox bombings. He's a college student and they haven't found him. The infamous Enron memos, Get Shorty and Ricochet. It was all about manipulating the market. Millions of women who are not getting health care, making too much money for Medicaid and not enough for other insurance. We'll take a closer look. And from China tonight, the old college try. It isn't easy for a panda.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening, everyone. It was the middle of the afternoon in Washington. The President and the Israeli Prime Minister were deep in conversation about how to avoid further violence in the Middle East, when the word was flashed from Israel that there had been an explosion just south of Tel Aviv. There was confusion at first. The top story of a building had collapsed. Then the Israeli police said it was a suicide bomb, that at least 16 people had died and at least 60 injured. Another episode of death and destruction is bad enough, but the timing makes it seem like a defiant act against any negotiations for peace. We'll go to the White House in just a moment, but first we go to Israel and ABC's Gillian Finley. Gillian?
Peter, according to Al-Manar television in Lebanon, the Islamic group Hamas has claimed responsibility for tonight's attack. A Hamas leader in Gaza has told us that this is a message to Israelis that the Palestinian will to resist has not been broken.
It was, said a woman who witnessed the blast, like the end of the world. It happened in Rishon LeZion's commercial district. The bomber apparently made his way into a pool hall on the third floor of this building. The explosion was so strong, part of the ceiling collapsed, trapping some of the people below. Many of the victims were teenagers, Israeli officials said. It was the first suicide bombing in 3 weeks, the first since Operation Defensive Shield, Israel's massive military operation that was designed to wipe out Palestinian terror.
One cannot feel anything but total shock, total horror at the bestial hand of Palestinian terrorism, which has smitten us once again in the heart of Israel.
Israeli TV tonight said the bomber had carried the explosives in a suitcase. The pool hall is not in a crowded part of town, not close to other clubs. The speculation is the bomber must have known this place, known that a lot of people would be there.
And Peter, tonight Yasser Arafat, we understand, is in his compound in Ramallah. His aides tell us that they are drafting a statement condemning the attack, just like they always condemn all attacks on civilians, they say, be they Israeli or Palestinian.
Many thanks,
Peter?
Gillian Finley in Israel. Of course, Hamas does not answer, if it was Hamas, does not answer to Yasser Arafat. This was an issue at the White House today, certainly in the press room. Everybody knew what was going on, while Mr. Bush and Mr. Sharon were talking in the Oval Office. We're joined at the White House tonight by ABC's Terry Moran. Terry, I know there were some serious disagreements between the two men today, which you'll talk about, but first of all, how did they get this news?
Well, Peter, about 20 minutes into this high-stakes meeting, aides to both men came into the Oval Office and slipped them notes informing them only of an incident near Tel Aviv. It wasn't until after the meeting broke up that they were informed of the gravity of this bombing. That's when President Bush, we are told, expressed his condolences to the Prime Minister for what he called a wanton loss of life from this incident. But neither man commented publicly on the bombing because the reporters who went into the Oval Office didn't ask them about it.
But afterwards, Mr. Bush spoke generally about the long-term effects of wave after wave of violence in the region.
Listen, I deeply hurt when there is a lack of hope for moms and dads of anybody, Palestinian moms and dads. It bothers me.
The president said he was sending CIA Director George Tenet back to the region to help establish a single Palestinian security force that can be trusted, as opposed to the complex, shadowy network of groups that operate now, pledging the U.S. to
immediately begin to help rebuild a security force in Palestine that will fight terror, that will bring some stability to the region.
Prime Minister Sharon, who came to the White House with what he said was evidence that Yasser Arafat is directly involved in terror attacks, was asked if he was ready to talk about Palestinian statehood.
I think that it's still premature to discuss this issue.
And the president made clear he would not insist that Sharon deal directly with Arafat.
I'm never going to tell my friend the prime minister what to do on how to handle his business. That's his choice to make.
Privately, administration officials say they are not interested in Sharon's purported evidence showing Arafat himself may have directed terror attacks. Instead, the Bush administration is trying another tack, encouraging change in the way the Palestinian Authority governs its areas and hoping responsible leaders will emerge.
The Palestinians need to develop a constitution, rule of law, transparency. They've got to have a treasury that is able to battle corruption.
Just a few minutes ago, the Israeli embassy announced that Prime Minister Sharon is canceling his meetings over the next couple of days with other U.S. officials and will be heading home perhaps as early as tonight. And Peter, as he does so, White House officials say he carries one more admonition from the president about the peace talks, that no matter what the security situation is, there must be a move towards some kind of political discussion of a settlement of this issue.
Thanks, Terry. Terry Moran at the White House. In Bethlehem, by the way, one final note from the region, there is still no end to the standoff between the Israeli military and the Palestinians who have been inside the Church of the Nativity. A deal fell through today after Italy said it had not agreed to take in 13 suspected militants who have spent weeks inside the church. There'll be more from the Middle East later this evening on Nightline. In the overseas briefing tonight, 2 plane crashes. An Egyptair Boeing 737 crashed in Tunisia. It was approaching the airport in heavy fog and rain. Egyptian officials say there were 63 people on board and 20 of them were killed. And in China, a domestic flight of China Northern crashed into the sea near the city of Dalian. There were 103 passengers and 9 crew, and there is no word yet of survivors. The pilot reported that there was a fire in the cabin. In eastern Afghanistan, Canadian troops have finished a sweep of the bombed-out Tora Bora cave complex. They brought back DNA samples taken from human remains, which they found, but the U.S. says they were not looking specifically for evidence of Osama bin Laden's death. The FBI said today it has identified a suspect in the mailbox bombings throughout the Midwest. He is a 21-year-old Wisconsin college student named Luke John Helder. Mr. Helder is suspected of having something to do with the 18 bombs which have been found in 5 states, including one which was found today in Amarillo, Texas. The authorities are not able to find him. ABC's Pierre Thomas is at the FBI building in Washington with the latest on the search. Pierre?
Peter, tonight all law enforcement agencies in the Midwest have been told, be on alert for Luke Helder.
The FBI is asking Helder, an industrial arts student at the University of Wisconsin-Stout, to turn himself in.
We encourage, as a public safety message here, Luke Helder to make contact with us. We do not want to see him harmed or any public harmed.
Sources tell ABC News that one of Helder's roommates told investigators there was evidence of black powder residue and pieces of pipe in their off-campus apartment. And investigators were told that Helder had not been seen on campus for a week.
We were contacted by the FBI early this morning and told that the student was under investigation.
Investigators have recovered fingerprints from the evidence left behind at the crime scenes. They want to compare those to Helder's fingerprints. According to sources, FBI and Postal Service investigators also contacted Helder's father, who said his son had made anti-government statements in the past.
I really want you to know that Luke is not a dangerous person. I think he's just trying to make a statement about the way our government is run.
Law enforcement officials say that while the leads are promising, there's not yet enough evidence to charge him with any crime. Helder played in a local rock band called Apathy. Those who know him say he wasn't the type who would try to kill.
I was very shocked and surprised. He was a great friend.
Law enforcement believes whoever is planning the pipe bombs may be having a change of heart. The pipe bomb recovered today in Texas did not have the 9-volt battery needed to detonate it, and the bomber left a note which said he did not want to kill.
The fear tonight that all the attention might cause the bomber to panic and do something rash. Peter?
Thank you, Pierre. Pierre Thomas in Washington. When we come back tonight, one more Enron investigation. Did the corporation orchestrate California's energy crisis in the name of profit? Millions of women going without the health care they need. We'll take a closer look tonight at why women cannot afford it.
All my kids have, and I should have, taken better care. I just didn't know how to do it.
And at the end of the broadcast tonight, the giant panda helping a rare species save itself from extinction.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by Office Depot.
The national briefing begins tonight in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Father Paul Shanley appeared in court today where he was formally charged with raping a young boy many years ago. The judge entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf. Big news about guns made in Washington. The Justice Department has informed the Supreme Court it believes the Constitution protects the right of individual Americans to own guns. This reverses the government's long-standing position that individual gun ownership may be restricted, the Second Amendment notwithstanding. And the government may double the fee it charges airline passengers for increased security. The fee would go up from $2.50 a flight to $5, and it could be as high as $20 after a passenger had made several connections. The White House said today there's going to be a vigorous investigation into a government report which says the Enron company was largely to blame for the power crisis in California last year. That was, Californians remember, when power shortages caused 6 days of blackouts and cost taxpayers billions of dollars in inflated bills. Here's ABC's Judy Muller.
California officials have long suspected that energy traders were manipulating the market during the energy crisis. The Enron memos released this week strongly suggest they were right.
Enron knew what it was doing from the very beginning. It wanted to basically bilk us for every dollar they could, and that's exactly what they did.
The memos, written in December 2000 by Enron lawyers, describe strategies with code names like Death Star, Get Shorty, and Ricochet, which was essentially an energy laundering scheme. Ricochet involved taking electricity from the California market, where in-state prices were capped, and moving it to neighboring states. The electricity was then sold back to California at a highly inflated price. One of the most offensive strategies, says economist Peter Navarro, was called Fat Boy.
Here they were buying power here under price caps, selling it to people struggling up in the Pacific Northwest for 5 times the amount they bought it for, and causing blackouts and brownouts in California while they were doing it.
Senator Dianne Feinstein is calling for a criminal investigation.
In my book, this is outright fraud.
If so, then how did Enron manage to pull it off? Economists point to California's flawed deregulation plan, a plan Enron helped to draft.
If you want to look at who was responsible, it was the politicians who were gullible enough to take Enron's money and then give them the legislation they want. But we've got 35 million innocent people here who got the shaft.
In one of the memos, Enron lawyers acknowledged the company was creating power shortages, but they didn't seem worried about it, saying, quote, "The strategy appears not to present any problems other than a public relations risk." Judy Muller, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Horse lovers, racing lovers, take note. The great racehorse Seattle Slew died this morning, 25 years to the day since he won the Kentucky Derby. He was 28 years old. We did a piece on him only last week. There are now no living winners of racing's Triple Crown. When we come back, why women have a harder time paying for medical care and how their health suffers for it. We'll take a closer look. We're going to take a closer look tonight at why many women do not get adequate health care. The Kaiser Family Foundation released a study today which finds that it is more difficult for women to afford doctors' visits and medications, and that they need more of them. Thus, many women avoid medical attention even when they need it. Here's ABC's Jackie Judd.
Teresa Page of Azle, Texas, says she didn't see a doctor for 2 years, even though she has asthma, emphysema, high blood pressure, and diabetes.
I'm the Red Queen.
Page is a widow, the mother of 3 children. Her income was too high to qualify for Medicaid, but not high enough to afford insurance, so she made choices.
There was always, something for the kids, or we all had to eat. and, you know, keep a roof over our head and a car.
The Kaiser Family Foundation survey found that women are more likely than men to forego medical care. 24% delayed or skipped a needed visit to a doctor. 21% did not get prescriptions filled. Why more women than men?
Women are more likely to be low income. They're also more likely to have broader health care needs than men.
There is another reason. A majority of women control how health care dollars are spent in a family, and some put themselves last, even at great peril.
Teresa Page faced the consequences of not seeing a doctor.
So I ended up in the hospital several times and found out that everything had gotten worse than it was.
Doctors say there are things they can do to stop that spiral before it begins. Getting needy patients discounts from brand name drug makers, prescribing lower cost generic drugs, or giving out free samples.
These are the samples.
Ann Crystal's doctor provided her with several months' worth of samples of an expensive diabetes drug. Crystal also went to Mexico to buy her medicine more cheaply. Crystal is a travel agent. She figures that buying the drug in a U.S. pharmacy would have consumed 5% of her income.
I'm sitting here, and I'm not poor. I just kind of feel like I've slipped through the cracks, and that I don't matter.
Surveys routinely show that women view health care as a critical political issue. Kaiser says the results out today show why it is so important. Jackie Judd, ABC News, Washington.
Closer look for today. And just before we go any further, a moment of universal praise for a great songwriter who has died. Great Balls of Fire was the signature song for Jerry Lee Lewis. It was written by Otis Blackwell.
Give me fever when you kiss me. Fever.
Peggy Lee's signature song was Fever.
Fever.
It was written by Otis Blackwell. Don't Be Cruel, Otis Blackwell. He also wrote All Shook Up and Return to Sender for Elvis Presley, who he never met. Otis Blackwell died in Nashville last night. He was 70. Man of 1,000 songs. We'll be back in just a moment. Finally from us this evening, preserving the pandas. There are only about 1,000 giant pandas left in the world. Most of them live in China's Sichuan province in the southwestern part of the country. There is a very big effort by the Chinese government, and by Americans too, to save them from extinction. ABC's Mark Litke has been to Sichuan to see them.
They just may be the world's most adored, most adorable animals. And there's no better place to fall under their spell than this remote mountainous region where most of the world's wild pandas still live. This is also home to the world's 2 largest panda reserves, where a reporter has a rare opportunity to get up close and personal with an animal that loves to play and loves to eat. Primarily bamboo, roughly 50 pounds of it per day. The reserves are part tourist attraction, but mostly serious research centers, where Chinese and American scientists work side by side to save the panda from extinction, with some notable success recently in captive breeding.
We had 4 cubs from last year. We had 5 from the year before.
Mike Allen came here from Zoo Atlanta.
They have made incredible progress here.
Incredible, because pandas have enormous difficulty breeding on their own. Many males, it seems, are downright inept at their reproductive role, a big problem since females are fertile for only 3 days each year. And even when they do succeed, well, pandas are born so tiny, smaller than a human hand, they struggle to survive. So scientists here have spent years helping the pandas help themselves. Suzanne Hall is a reproductive specialist from San Diego Zoo.
5 or 10 years ago, there was less than a 50% survivorship rate for young cubs into adulthood, but in the last several years, that's improved dramatically.
11-year-old male Gao Gao and 5-year-old Guo Guo were recently brought together to give it the old college try, and as expected, it didn't work. So the professionals moved in, sedating Guo Guo with a nasty-looking dart, then wheeling her off to the operating room for a painless artificial insemination procedure. Today, this technique accounts for more than half the births of pandas in captivity. Despite all the human affection and the extensive breeding efforts underway here, the sad truth is the future of these animals is still very uncertain. Their natural habitat is still threatened by farming, logging, and poaching. Even the growing numbers of well-meaning eco-tourists are taking their toll as new roads and hotels are built in the wild.
If the population keeps expanding farther and farther into the forest and up the mountains, they're going to wipe out the pandas.
The hope is that human expansion can be tamed to give the scientists and the pandas more time to make more progress. Mark Litke, ABC News, Sichuan Province.
And that is our report on World News Tonight. Tomorrow on the broadcast, along with the other news, the government takes action against a popular fitness device. I'm Peter Jennings. Have a good evening. Good night.